everybody? Welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and tonight on the show on Purple Insider, presented by FanDuel, of course, we will welcome Andrew Filipponi shortly, and he is going to talk about what the Pittsburgh offense is going to bring with Aaron Rodgers, what their defense is like so far, and who he thinks is going to win that game. That comes up in about 15 minutes, and then at 7:30 tonight, Manny Hill will join to pick the schedule as we do every Thursday night. And I am very curious to find out how many wins Manny thinks this team is going to end up with. Just gestures at everything, considering what is going on. But I have a question for you, and I'm going to bring this back for Manny a little later in the show, is how do you feel about Aaron Rodgers right now? Like, give me a word to describe how you feel about Aaron Rodgers now, as faithful of the purple folks who have watched the Minnesota Vikings battle against Aaron Rodgers for many, many years. Are you still in the mode of this man is the devil to your football team? Are you in the mode of indifferent, don't really care about this guy anymore? Are you thrilled that he didn't sign here? Are you mad that he didn't sign here? Like, what's your feeling right now about the Minnesota Vikings facing off with Aaron Rodgers? From my perspective, I just consider it to have been awesome to have driven to Lambeau Field in Green Bay and watched Mike Zimmer and Aaron Rodgers battle it out at the peaks of their powers. While Aaron Rodgers was still a superstar quarterback, while the Vikings had elite defenses, and Harrison Smith would be playing games with Rodgers, and Rodgers would be making crazy throws, and sometimes he'd get the Vikings, sometimes the Vikings would get him. You never knew exactly how it was going to play out. There were a bunch of classics with this man playing for the Packers against the Vikings, some that the Vikings won, like 2015 at the end of the season. They win the division by beating Rodgers. Others where, say, in even 2022, where he wasn't the same version of himself, but he was still terrific. He did that fake out and then ran in for a touchdown. There's so many throws that I've seen from him over the years. The first game ever at US Bank Stadium, where the Vikings defense played great against Rodgers. He throws the interception at the end of the game to Trey Waynes. That was a night where the offense did just enough to win that game. Sam Bradford played very well. Probably still one of the 5 loudest times I've ever heard US Bank Stadium. And then even, in recent years when he won the back-to-back MVPs, they had the classic when they went down to Green Bay and they beat him up. DJ Wanham, I think it was, caught him at the end of the game. It was a blustery day. He couldn't do much. Like, there's been so many back and forth battles. And then there was the one at the end of 2016 where him and Jordy Nelson just smoked that Vikings defense. That was the game where the Vikings secondary went rogue because they were unhappy with Zimmer. Like, there's a lot for me that comes to mind with Rodgers where I just think, gosh, that was some good football. It was really fun and interesting to watch one of the great quarterbacks in history play against one of the great defensive minds of that era, which I think is very fair to say about Mike Zimmer, with a stacked team with great players, Everson Griffin getting after him, Danielle Hunter getting after him, pressure up the middle from Linval Joseph, the double A gap stuff, and him trying to pick that apart. Just great games all the time against Aaron Rodgers. That's what I think of. I know that when the Vikings were considering having Aaron Rodgers as their quarterback, that was not something I was for. And I didn't have a ton of respect for the way that Rodgers handled the latter part of his time in Green Bay, and especially his time with the New York Jets, where he just turned that entire organization into a circus. And now I look at Rodgers and say, it's kind of similar to a lot of other quarterbacks when they get to the very end of their career, where there's still something there and they could still have some really good moments, but it's definitely not the same. So the first ones that come to mind for me, just for my era of watching football when it started, so this pops into my head, but there's plenty of examples through the eras of this happening, is Dan Marino and Joe Montana when both of those quarterbacks were at the end of their careers. And, Montana's playing for Kansas City, still kind of finding a way to win. He's grinding it out. Like, the arm's not the same. The health isn't the same. And ultimately, it ended up fading out with him. Dan Marino, his last year was basically the worst year of his career. Couldn't really move anymore, but still every once in a while you would get that flash where that arm would just let loose something spectacular. Even Tom Brady, when he came back for that one extra year, and they went, I think, 8-9, but he had a couple of comebacks in there, grinded them out to the playoffs despite being 8-9 or 8-8. It must have been 8-9 that year. You still saw a little bit of it, but he couldn't move the same way. Looked very stiff back there. Looked like he didn't want anything to do with being hit. I will say that Rodgers this year with Pittsburgh does look like he's enjoying football more than he did with the Jets. Everything with the Jets just looked miserable. And I did not enjoy watching that. I did not enjoy watching Aaron Rodgers, one of the all-time great quarterbacks, going out and just hating football. And no one likes to get hit, but especially not when you get to my and Aaron Rodgers' age. I don't like anything that's going to hurt me. Sometimes when I'm playing with the dog in the backyard, he'll get aggressive and hit, drop me on the ground, get behind me and trip me up or something. I don't like that too much these days. If I was a younger person, then I probably would. And I could feel that in Aaron Rodgers still, but he at least has looked like he's having more fun with this organization playing football. And I'm curious whether we see a beleaguered, old, bruised version of Rodgers, or if we see him have some fun against the Vikings and we just end up watching a great battle between Brian Flores' defense trying to mix him up, him trying to sort his way through it, him making great throws, him making some mistakes because he's old. I'm intrigued. But for me, it's one of those things of kind of history that when you go to Lambeau Field, there's so much history there, and you see a quarterback, and putting aside some of the personality stuff with him, because the first game that I covered down there was 2016. He's still great then, and really all the way through 2021, some ups and downs, but you get to see the great football player and some of the throws that he made from either messy pockets where he had no room whatsoever, or especially the ones that are on the run when he would do kind of that hop, skip, and a jump thing, and the ball just travels so much different. So as an enjoyer of all things football and football history, it's pretty cool to have seen some of that stuff happen in some of his greatest seasons, where he will clearly go to the Hall of Fame. But I wonder if now, as you guys Vikings fans can reflect a little bit more and say, you know what, hated him every single Sunday, but man, that guy, he played us hard and a lot of great moments. Or if you just can't, no, don't ever say anything nice about Aaron Rodgers. Forget him. And how do you feel about him this Sunday? Are you concerned about the Vikings facing him? Are you totally fine with it? Are you pumped? Do you think that he'll just be terrible? That I am very interested in, and we'll get the thoughts from Andrew Filipponi here shortly. And that kind of dovetails into the FanDuel question of the day. I thought it was interesting. There are so many different props that you can get over at FanDuel. And I noticed that Dallas Turner is actually the favorite to get a sack in this game for the Vikings at plus 106 on FanDuel. How many times do the Vikings need to sack Aaron in order to win this game? Let me read a few of your responses, and we'll get to Andrew Filipponi, and then we'll talk with Manny Hill about Aaron Rodgers a little later in the day. Andrew says Aaron in one word is beatable. DOD goes with old. Okay, I don't disagree at all with that. Mr. Mayor wants to sack him 30 times. Yeah, 30 is maybe a little high for the FanDuel question of the day. I was going to go with maybe 3. But if one of them is early in the game, then I think it could have an impact in the entire game. It certainly was. Like, Rodgers has so many moments. Now, I reflect on it as the first thing that goes into my brain with Rodgers is just the throws, the plays, the great battles. But there are plenty of instances of him just being flat out obnoxious, and including when he was hit by Anthony Barr, which at the time was a legal hit. I don't think Anthony tried to stop himself from falling on Aaron Rodgers, but that was not against the rules. It's actually better that it is against the rules because it turns out, which I didn't think was possible, but these guys are freaks. It is possible to not just land on a quarterback with your entire body. And I think that even there's already too many quarterback injuries. So ultimately it was good for the game and it resulted in some really stupid penalties and some really bad penalties at times. But ultimately now when guys who are rushing the passer are being trained not to just flop 250 or 60 pounds on a quarterback, it's probably saved some collarbones out there. But Aaron going on late night television and whining about that was pretty soft. And there's been a lot of moments from him that we've made fun of through the years, darkness retreats and a lot of other strange stuff with Rodgers that I have not necessarily been a fan of or wouldn't have wanted on my football team if I had been the Green Bay Packers. But so I guess it's an appreciation and a respect for what he's done on the football field. But when things go wrong for Rodgers, like they did with the Jets, I can't say that I took my own darkness retreat to cry about it, right? Because all the stuff toward the end of his career, he's been pretty obnoxious. And for a while there, you just could not get away from the Rodgers discussion. And that's another thing I've found pretty interesting is that he's gone to Pittsburgh. I haven't heard a word about him. I haven't seen him as part of any debate shows. I haven't seen anybody that's sort of like, oh, yeah, oh, okay, yeah, Rodgers over there. It's been all right, So Rob says most national pundits seem to see this as a close game. I think the Vikings at full strength dominate both trenches and win comfortably. I would see it that way, too. I think the FanDuel line is minus 2.5 for the Vikings. I think that's a little bit low, but maybe they're just factoring in that it's Carson Wentz and he's not a starting quarterback. And it's an international game, and sometimes these are weird. But I think the Vikings are the better team here. And there is important on the injury report. I wanted to get to that before Andrew Filipponi, which is that Alex Highsmith, who is a great pass rusher for the Steelers, did not practice for 2 straight days with an ankle injury. So that is something to watch for the Steelers, because I think their biggest asset is their ability to get after the passer. And it really tells you how old this Steelers team is, where you see on their injury report, Cameron Hayward, not injury related, rest, didn't practice. DK Metcalf didn't practice. TJ Watt didn't practice. They're not even hurt. They're just not practicing. And even yesterday, Darius Slay not practicing because he's old. Jonnu Smith not practicing because he's old. I mean, there's just a lot of guys for that team that have been long in the tooth. And so Pittsburgh is in kind of a weird spot where they've pushed a lot of chips to the middle of the table, but I don't think they're that good. Lucas is going with washed, Rob with lead boots. So I'm guessing that you guys are not reflective anytime your team is playing Aaron Rodgers. Jim says pressure with 4 is how to beat Rodgers. I would agree with that. Last year, some of the simulated pressures where you send 4, but it's not the 4 defensive linemen got to him. Monty wants another pick 6 by Andrew Van Ginkel, which I should also mention did not practice today. And that I think is pretty concerning for the Vikings with Andrew Van Ginkel, that he's dealing with these injuries early on in the season. They need him for the rest of the year. And I'm curious about whether they play him this week or if they wait, or if it's another 8 snaps. I mean, he got 2 sacks. That was great. But do you want to have him out there for a couple of snaps where he might end up getting hurt again or re-injuring something? That don't love that idea. RJ wants 3 sacks in order to beat Aaron Rodgers. I think that's a good number. I definitely think that is a good number. Is if you get him with 3 sacks, 1 at the beginning of the game, just to make him feel the pressure. And then from there, later in the game, in the big moments, when he cannot escape. And the numbers tell a pretty clear story about Aaron Rodgers this year, that he has wanted nothing to do with the pressure. And I think that's where the Vikings have their biggest advantage. He's only been pressured. This is a crazy number. He's only been pressured 30% of the time because he's getting rid of the ball so fast. But when he's been pressured, he is 6 for 22 passing when he's under pressure. 6 for 22 with 2 interceptions. Now, you mentioned the blitzing. He's actually been pretty good against the blitz, but he's got 2 of his touchdowns against the blitz, but he's only 11 for 23. So I'll be very curious to see how they interpret that. And he's gotten rid of the ball in 2.3 seconds when he's been blitzed. Great data. Tell us the story. So when he's being blitzed, he's getting rid of the ball fast and he's not completing a heck of a lot of passes. So I could see Brian Flores really trying to get after him in this game with some early blitzes to get that early sack and try to throw him off. Jim says, I'd like to see Turner drop to cover a tight end while Pace seems to find Rodgers. They've been doing that quite a bit with Dallas Turner. They have been dropping him back in coverage. He's really played the Andrew Van Ginkel role over the last couple of weeks and done a pretty good job. But I think, the difference between a young player like Turner that has talent and someone who's a second-team All-Pro is doing it every game. And Turner was really good against Cincinnati. Can he carry that over against an offensive line? Let me pull this up. That just hasn't really been all that good in Pittsburgh. Where are they ranked? PFF has them 23rd in pass blocking right now. So there's a clear edge here. And that comes down to pressure. So again, that FanDuel question of the day, how many times do the Vikings have to sack Aaron Rodgers to throw him off his game and win against the San Francisco 49ers? Why did I say the 49ers? Against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I was reading San Francisco 49ers. I'm surprised I don't do that more often. Pittsburgh Steelers. That's who the Vikings are playing. K-Mac says, can Rodgers get anything done if they drop into hot route lanes to get home quick? No, I mean, great point. The answer is probably not. And we saw that against the Jets last year, is the Vikings would show blitzes. Sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't. But when they dropped back, so he was getting his pre-snap read, they dropped back. There were several times where he just had to panic and fling it somewhere or even take a sack. I've never thought that Rodgers was brilliant before the snap. Now, he's experienced, but I never thought that he was the best of the best. I thought it was really arm strength and athleticism that made him, and now he's only got maybe 3/4 of one of those things, and definitely not the athleticism. And I was thinking about this with Rodgers. I'll talk about it with Manny. Like, what if he was playing quarterback for the Vikings? If he was playing quarterback for the Vikings and his numbers are what they are with Pittsburgh, I think we would all be saying, it's fine, but they're probably not going to win. And what was this really for? He's averaging 6.8 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns, 3 picks. They're doing okay. He's game managing to some extent. They're throwing underneath stuff. And once you see him on tape looking the way he's looking, which is totally immobile, I'm not sure that it would have gone the way that some people were imagining with him just throwing lasers to Justin Jefferson. It probably would have been the occasional that, but I think he would have just wanted to get the football out of his hands, regardless of whether it was a good idea or not, which also may be what Carson Wentz does. I don't know. So we will see when it comes to Rodgers, as far as whether he tunes it up a few times with the arm, how they manage their strategy against the Vikings. And for more on that, a friend of mine, Andrew Filipponi, who is a host in Pittsburgh, 93.7. Funny enough, we did not cross paths in Buffalo, but he's from Buffalo. We both worked at the same radio station, but at different times. So kind of funny little coincidence there. He's in Pittsburgh now. I'm here. And we're both enjoying where we're at, except for when you listen to Andrew talk about his team that he covers, maybe he isn't enjoying it quite as much. So with a big-time breakdown here on Vikings against the Steelers, I welcome in Andrew Filipponi. All right, we welcome into the show. Usually we're sitting in opposite seats here of this situation. Andrew Filipponi, 93.7 in Pittsburgh. Andrew, very interesting start to the season for all of us, wouldn't you say? We got to begin with kind of how weird Pittsburgh's start to the season is. The crazy game with the Jets, a crazy game with the Patriots. How are you feeling? What are people in Pittsburgh, what are the Yinzers saying about the Pittsburgh Steelers in the Aaron Rodgers era?
Well, it's been a lot of the same. It is, I think, if you're a Vikings fan or you don't watch the Steelers week to week every Sunday, it does seem like there are unusual happenings or strange things that occur with them. But it's really life as a Steelers fan because they have this propensity to win all of these insanely close games in bizarre fashion. And at the end of the year, you add up their wins and there's 9 or 10 of them. And then they go and get blasted in the wild card round every season. So that has become reality for Steelers fans. And I would say the first 3 weeks, even though it's different because Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback, it still feels like that's this team's destiny. They're in first place. They're not the Ravens, who have obviously defensive issues and are 1-2. They're not Cincinnati, that now has to make up for the loss of Joe Burrow. But I'd be lying to you, Matthew, if I said because of that pain and suffering felt by Bengals fans and the struggles in Baltimore have made fans here feel much better about their situation, because I don't really think that's happened. I feel like the conversation for much of this week has been about what they did wrong in New England rather than what they did right to come away with a win in that game.
I know all about this, my friend. This sounds to me just like the Kirk Cousins, Mike Zimmer era in Minnesota, where you're competitive every single year. And when you go into games, and I've seen you tweet about this, the broadcasters will praise everybody on, well, they've got a great coach and the quarterback's great and all this stuff. And yet the boredom has sort of set in. And you have gone through a lot of years of this, from the Duck Hodges to the Kenny Pickett. And with Aaron Rodgers, and I know that you haven't agreed with PFF's grade of him so far, which is completely fair, but it does look like there's going to be a ceiling on what you can actually get from Aaron Rodgers as the quarterback. I mean, this guy has not played at an MVP level since 2021. That was a really long time ago in our lives. And since then, he's basically been a bottom third type of quarterback with some great plays and some limitations. And I think it's fair, when you look at the weapons, the offensive line, the running game, to say, meh, like what can all of this be? And it probably is. Some weeks it could be really good, and a lot of weeks it's going to be very average.
I do believe, though, that he would be in a much better situation had Minnesota wanted him this offseason. And I actually think if he were in the Minnesota offense right now, the Vikings might be better off and the Steelers might be better off too, because it would have forced them to kind of come to grips with who they really are and where they are in their, greater scheme of the NFL. Um, Instead, I would say through 3 games, I do disagree with PFF strongly. I think he's been an average to slightly above average quarterback through the first 3 games. And I think the reason why maybe the numbers don't look as good, although the numbers aren't bad. I mean, he's got 7 touchdowns and only Lamar Jackson has more. I would say it's more a byproduct of what's around him, his situation, his circumstances. The offensive line has been atrocious. Now, it didn't allow any sacks against New England last week, which was a big step because they went into that game with 9. They had sacked, I think, Geno Smith 5 times and Tua 4 times in those 2 games. So to give up none was, I think, progress. However, they also are getting rid of the ball faster than any team. And that limits them as far as the playmaking from DK Metcalf and Calvin Austin. And they talked a big game with all these tight ends they have, and they've barely utilized those through the first 3 games. They haven't run the ball at all. So, if you put Aaron Rodgers, and this is probably true of a lot of quarterbacks, though, if you put Aaron Rodgers in LA or in Minnesota or even in, Cincinnati's line stinks too. But I think if you put him in some of these other situations, I think the discussion about him is a more positive one. And I think there's a reason why, although he denied it on Wednesday, I do think his preference was Minnesota and not Pittsburgh. And he got told Minnesota was going to go with McCarthy, and this is the pivot and decision that he made ultimately.
Oh, I mean, there's no question. I mean, he was calling up Kevin O'Connell night and day at all hours saying, can I please just come and throw the football to Justin Jefferson? And I don't doubt that Aaron Rodgers would be the best version of himself, because every quarterback is, including Carson Wentz, who's been a backup for years and comes in and completes 70% of his passes and throws it to Jefferson and Hawkinson. And and they move the ball. Darisaw's back at left tackle, and everybody's happy. Then, of course, Sam Darnold last year, like, we know what this offense, these weapons, and this coach can do. I think that the reason the Vikings decided not to go with him is really because what is the upside if he's not
Yeah.
the elite Aaron Rodgers that he once was? Can you really go into the playoffs and win? And I think that they thought if you could get through early rocky parts of JJ McCarthy and then get him to a point of developing to start reaching what he's going to be by the middle late part of the season, then you've got a higher upside. Now that hasn't played out so far because football always has twists and turns for us. But I think I understand why they did not want to go with Rodgers. They wanted to get McCarthy on the field and start taking advantage of that rookie quarterback contract. I don't know how they would manage that again, though. I think maybe they would bring him in if they knew that it was going to look like how it looked, and then also that McCarthy was going to be injured. But what does the offense look like with Rodgers? Because here's my thing. When I just took a quick look at the PFF grade, one thing is that it's 3 games, and we love to use these as like a game score and stuff. And I think that's, understandable for fans, but we need much bigger samples than that. And he's had a lot of turnover worthy plays, which get hammered by PFF grades. And I think I've always talked about this with routine good reads to wide open receivers. They don't get rewarded. And I've always thought that they should get rewarded more by PFF because they never like Jared Goff. He just throws to wide open receivers, but you have to find them and throw on time. Anyway, that's sort of always been my issue with those, the PFF grades, is not giving enough credit to routine stuff. But describe it to me. What does it look like? I see DK Metcalf has caught like 2 passes past 10 yards, which is kind of interesting to me.
Well, the one thing I'll say on the positive end of things to defend Rodgers and their offense, not that it needs me to, glorify it or lavish it with praise because it doesn't deserve it, the way that Minnesota's offense does or some of the other high octane ones in the NFL. Their games have been much better from the jump. This has been a problem that's plagued the Steelers. They went all last year without a touchdown on the opening drive. And they've come out this year and they've scored on every opening drive. They scored a touchdown against the Jets. They kicked a field goal against Seattle. They scored a touchdown last week against New England. So whatever kind of mind meld they have between the two, Rodgers and Smith, it's worked. They got the ball quick and short to Metcalf on that opening drive, yards after catch, and then they had a really nice play call in the red zone that went for a Gainwell touchdown where he basically could have moonwalked into the end zone. It was that easy. And then the other thing that's been really a huge breath of fresh air here is their red zone offense has probably been the best in the NFL. They get down there, they score touchdowns, they don't kick field goals. And when you've had Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett directing things, Justin Fields not seeing the field other than being a great runner, obviously. We saw what Russell Wilson did in the red zone against Kansas City, and that's why he's not their quarterback anymore. So it's been a huge upgrade there. So they've been opportunistic, both sides of the ball. Offense, they're scoring touchdowns. And then the other gripe I have with PFF, to go back to that, is the touchdown pass he makes to win the game against the Jets. He gets no credit for that from them, none. It's a back shoulder throw on 3rd and 6 to Calvin Austin. They could have easily went with a more conservative play call there, kicked a field goal, gone up 3, and taken their chances. It's a complete ad lib play by Rodgers. It's out of the context of the offense. He sees something pre-snap. He sees single coverage. He trusts Austin. He makes a throw to him that's not even really one that's out of their playbook. It's a play that he just believes as a 21-year vet he can make. That doesn't happen with the other quarterbacks they've had here, in my opinion. And so we are getting probably the mental aptitude and cerebral qualities in Aaron Rodgers that we haven't had since Big Ben, and I think it's made the Steelers' offense passable. Not great, but at least competent through the first 3 games, Matt.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to just about anything, you can't use one number, one statistic to capture everything. And I think that the mental part of the game for the quarterback and how you read things out is not very easy to figure out when you're trying to grade it out. So, but with Rodgers, we've seen this. I don't think anyone in Minnesota would ever downplay his talent or ever doubt him and what he can be. Because even in the game against the Jets last year, where he looked cooked and they fired their coach after the game, he still almost won. Like, he brought them back toward the end of that game and was driving to potentially win it if Stephon Gilmore didn't pick him off at the end. So I don't think there's much doubt there. The matchup to me in this game that's going to determine everything is both defensive lines and how much success they can have. Because when I look at Cam Hayward, I'm like, talk about ageless players. My goodness, in the PFF grade, he's still the highest graded player on the team. TJ Watt, I know you guys got beef with PFF over that, but I think we all agree, one of the best players in the NFL. And on the Vikings side, they have completely revamped their ability to pressure up the middle. How do you weigh the offensive line of Pittsburgh versus the defensive line of the Vikings? The defensive line of Pittsburgh, I noticed their pressure percentage is very high, that they've been getting after quarterbacks. I think this is a little battle of the trenches here in Dublin.
Well, I would have said I would have felt good about this matchup from the Steelers' defensive standpoint after watching the Atlanta game and seeing what the Falcons did against that kind of ad hoc Vikings offensive line. But Darisaw's back. Is the center back too?
Yes, Ryan Kelly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so he's back. And Brian O'Neill, I think, is excellent. So I don't know. I think we saw huge signs of life for them in the New England game. It was Watt's best game of the season. He had 2 sacks. He recovered a fumble. He was visible. You could tell that Morgan Moses, the right tackle, was just getting crushed in that game, and they needed to chip and help. And then Cam Hayward literally saved 2 touchdowns. He got a finger on a ball at the goal line at the end of the first half, which went for an interception. If he doesn't deflect it and change the direction of the ball, it's probably a touchdown. And then after Aaron Rodgers threw by far his worst pass of the season, which went for a Robert Spillane interception that was returned inside the Steelers' 10-yard line, he forced Ramondre Stevenson to fumble the ball at the goal line, and the Steelers recovered. So that's a 14-point swing there for the Steelers, essentially made really by him, all by him. And it's interesting, Matthew, because he's a little bit of persona non grata here because of his contract dispute in the offseason. And the guy was pretty much put on a pedestal before that and was looked at as one of the pillars of the Steelers locker room. And he gave all that away with this contract dispute. I sense some of that has come back, but not entirely. And so you're not going to get a lot of Steelers fans who want to pound the table for Cam Hayward right now and say nice things about him, but I will. And I think that the other big X factor for this game in that trench battle you're talking about is what Derek Harmon shows up against the Vikings, because he was their first round pick. He was drafted because of how bad they were in that Baltimore playoff game against the run, 300 rushing yards. He missed the first 2 games coming back from a knee injury suffered in the preseason. He was on a pitch count, and I thought with no practice barely and with no NFL regular season experience, I thought he was fantastic against New England. He had a sack on the second drive. They really had gotten gouged in the run game like crazy the first 2 weeks. They gave up 100 yards in this game, but frankly, Matt, it was mostly because of Drake May in his legs. It had very little to do with New England's running backs. That was a huge point of progress for them, what they did against New England's run game. So I think he's a big time factor in this game because it allows for them now maybe to move Black, who's a rookie, to nose tackle, and get Keanu Benton out of there from Wisconsin, who's just been a disaster through 3 games at defensive tackle. So I think the Steelers are a little bit better up front than they were previously. In their offensive line, I have not a lot of hope for. I do think that that's an area where Minnesota should have a huge advantage in this game. The Steelers haven't run the ball on anybody. Preseason, regular season, even in practice, they were getting beat by their own run defense. And I don't see why that would change in Dublin on Sunday.
Yeah, and that was a huge thing for the Vikings to fix against Cincinnati. And Cincinnati can't run the ball either, but the fact that they got steamrolled against Atlanta's running game with Bijan Robinson, once you can't run the ball against this defense and you get in 2nd and 8 or 3rd and 6 or more, that's when Brian Flores starts to do all the black magic that he can do. And, Harrison Smith with his wizardry of making checks and changes. And that matchup between he and Rodgers intellectually is super fascinating. Harrison was just telling us yesterday that he keeps track of the different deceptive things he does so he doesn't do them twice in a row. So he like has his own mental like whatever you call it Rolodex of his different
Yeah.
on this coverage I showed this and now I'm not going to do it that way. So he and Rodgers over the years have had these great battles. But I wonder what you think about the secondary of Pittsburgh because it hasn't looked like it has clicked maybe in the same way that people expected it. I will tell you the truth. I thought Pittsburgh's going to have an unbelievable secondary with Slay and you're getting Jalen Ramsey over there. Is it just not clicking yet, or is it new players, or is it scheme, or what do you think it's been?
It's a loaded question that has a lot of layers to it. But the overall point is that yes, it's been extremely disappointing. I think I don't have the stat in front of me to give it to you with 100% confidence, but I'm pretty sure they've been the worst defense in the NFL at stopping teams from converting 3rd and long through the first 3 games, and it's mainly been an issue with busted coverages. And it was so bad. Terrell Austin, who was pretty soft spoken, he's a figurehead puppet defensive coordinator. Mike Tomlin does everything, but he has to come out and talk to reporters on Thursday. And last week he dropped f bombs in his press conference, which for the conservative Rooney family is not something that they're a huge fan of. But he was trying to get the point across, like I've we've talked about this. Yes, we have moving parts back there because of injury, but it's unacceptable that these crossing patterns have killed us for 2 games in a row, giving up touchdowns because guys don't know what they're doing on these given plays. And then New England exploited that again. Hunter Henry had one of his biggest games of the last few years against the Steelers. Just killed them over the middle. Had 2 touchdowns in the game as well. So they have made excuses like, "Hey, we've got young guys and we've got new guys." But this is also a defense that had Juan Thornhill come out and say that he thought this was the best defense of all time, and Mike Tomlin came out and said we're going to do historic things defensively. So they talked a big game and they haven't been able to back it up, frankly. They said they were going to have all kinds of tricks up their sleeve with Jalen Ramsey. It looked like they were on course to do that, but then Joey Porter Jr. got injured in the Jets game and hasn't played since. Now, he might come back and play, and Deshaun Elliott, who they gave an extension to this offseason at safety, might come back and play in this game too. So maybe that helps them put a lid on it. But honestly, what we've seen so far is Ramsey is given up big plays and made big plays. So he's been feast or famine. Eccles, actually, the slot corner, had a couple of big stops, an interception, and then the 4th down stop against the Patriots. So he's fine. But it's mainly a communication thing. And really, Matthew, more than anything else, what it's done here for people this week is it continues to drive Steelers fans nuts that Brian Flores is in Minnesota and not here. And it really is a sticking point in a craw, in a stick in your craw thing for fans here because they feel like they had, after maybe Vic Fangio and a couple other guys, the best offensive coordinator in the NFL in their building, and they didn't promote him, and Mike Tomlin wasn't willing to give him the power that he wanted or would have wanted on the defensive side of the ball. Then that's frustrating for people.
Well, they deserve to feel that way. I mean, Brian Flores has been absolutely fantastic as the defensive coordinator of the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, not only is he really, really good with his schematics, and I think he's ahead of the game with, players moving around before the snap, making it really difficult on quarterbacks. I think his player evaluation skills have just moved this needle in a way that was hard to see. They were so bad a couple of years ago. I mean, literally one of the worst defenses in the NFL in 2022. And now for 2 straight years, they have been elite, and they were even good in his first year with not that much talent. It has been a revelation for the Vikings. I think it's the main reason that they are a contender. I would still say they're a contender this year, even if Carson Wentz or a young quarterback is there, that you can have one of the best defenses in the NFL. Now, I mean, it's not like Pittsburgh has been terrible on that side of the ball, but I think with the amount of talent there, it probably should have been better over the last few years. And I also think that when you have a guy like Tomlin, who's been doing it a certain way for a long time, maybe they don't change as much as they should, because I feel like I've heard that in different places of they kind of know what Tomlin's defense is and where guys are going to be. And the personnel has done enough with TJ Watt and Cam Hayward to make things difficult on opposing offenses. So I guess that leads me to the last thing I want to ask, which is, you afraid of Carson Wentz? You worried about Carson Wentz? You scared of Carson Wentz? How you feel about Carson Wentz?
Well, Mike Tomlin really has downplayed quarterbacks in every game before this one. He only mentioned Justin Fields as a runner. He pretty much gave Sam Darnold a backhanded compliment and said he's a well-traveled quarterback, which was a way of saying he's a journeyman and he's bounced around the league, and that was his opening remark on him. And then last week against New England with Drake May, same thing as Fields, just talked about his mobility. This was the first week he came out and said, they've got a quarterback here, Carson Wentz, who I really think is a guy that can kill you. And he knows it. He saw it in Philadelphia. They got pounded by Carson Wentz his rookie year. And it was really funny, Matt. In order to illustrate that point, he brought up unsolicited last year, and I was at this game, when he told his guys before the game, don't injure Anthony Richardson because I don't want to see Joe Flacco. And then sure enough, Richardson did get hurt. Flacco came in and cooked the Steelers defense. So he's very clairvoyant in that respect. I don't think Anthony Richardson expected Tuesday that he was going to get ripped by by the longest tenured coach in the NFL, but it happened. And I agree with him. I mean, I do think Wentz, and the thing I keep thinking about with him is the fact that Andy Reid and Sean McVay both wanted him as a backup quarterback to Patrick Mahomes and Matthew Stafford. And so there's obviously something there. There's a physical skill set there. And it's a matter of getting him to play intelligently and consistently. And I trust Kevin O'Connell to get that out of him with all the weapons that they have, including getting Jordan Addison back this week. So yes, within the framework of the Vikings offense, of course, I'm scared of Carson Wentz. I watched Justin Fields score 32 points against the Steelers defense in week 1. Absolutely. Sam Darnold looked fantastic other than really one good play by Jalen Ramsey and a batted ball at the line of scrimmage. He was outstanding against them, and I see no reason why Carson Wentz can't do the same thing in this game.
Yeah, I think with getting Jordan Addison back and now having the full bevy of weapons, I mean, they are in a situation that can amp up pretty much any quarterback skill set. And what I was impressed with for Wentz was getting the ball out quickly, and he still has a very live arm. He sort of lives in this place where he's just physically talented enough, even though he's been a backup, and just experienced enough, smart enough, where you could totally see it working with the Minnesota Vikings, as we've seen many times over this franchise's history, whether it was Randall Cunningham or Jeff George, or it's like, right, like just enough talent, even Sam Darnold, like just enough talent, even if their history isn't great, along with the circumstances. So who do you think will win this game? And let me double that with a question of, do you like that it's in Dublin? I mean, you can't, right? Like Steelers fans can't be thrilled that they are taken away from the home field advantage here, right?
Well, on that point, Steelers fans, even the ones that aren't going, actually love it because it's the Rooney family. They understand that the late Dan Rooney, the Pro Football Hall of Famer, the architect behind their 4 Super Bowl wins in the 70s, was an ambassador to Ireland under Obama. And this was like his lifelong dream, was for the Steelers to play a regular season game there. And so many Steelers fans have basically made a deal with themselves for years that if the game was ever going to get played in Dublin, they were going to make the trip for it. So I think this is a rare exception. If this game were in London, I think fans would be pissed, especially given some of the things that have gone on here. Now it's a level playing field, but I think based on what happened the last time the Steelers played the Vikings in London and getting there late in the week and looking lackadaisical and in a fog, that's people have long memories here and they remember that. So in that respect, I think there's a little bit of weariness over what kind of Steelers are we going to see early in this game, and are they going to sleepwalk through it? As far as how I think the game goes, no, I don't like the Steelers to win this game. I think that, and Ben Roethlisberger said this, my old co-host, and I agree with him 100%. I just think that they have a tremendous, being Minnesota, tremendous coaching advantage in this game. Um, Brian Flores worked with Tomlin. He knows Tomlin. Kevin O'Connell, offensively, I just would put his credentials and resume. I think it far exceeds Arthur Smith. So I think they've got a intellectual, strategic, schematic advantage in this game, Matthew. And I also think Minnesota, their roster is probably more balanced and more complete than the Steelers right now. So, no, I don't think the Steelers are going to win. I think we're going to see that Brian Flores defense, especially with the Steelers' inability to run the ball, really get to Aaron Rodgers and get under his skin in this game. And I think Minnesota's going to kind of rain on their parade here and spoil the party and go there and win this game. That if you ask the Rooney family, they can win one game this year. I think they pick this game over a wild card win. I really do. I think they want this game that bad because of what it means to their family.
And you think it's not going to happen? Well, I tend to agree with you. I mean, this is being looked at in Minnesota as if you're going to have a really good season, you got to go 2-0 overseas. The Vikings picked this. They made they wanted this. They wanted to go over. They feel very confident in what they can do from that perspective. And they've won all their overseas games. I think they're the stronger team from top to bottom. And now it is a matter of actually making it happen with a backup quarterback.
Cleveland home game too, or is that a Vikings home game?
It is a Cleveland home game. It's a big advantage. It is a big advantage for the Vikings to take 2 road games right off 100%. The slate.
Yeah, I agree with you. No wonder people are like, why do they want to do it? You just answered the question. You turned 2 home games into neutral site games. Now, I think there'll be way more Steelers fans there for this game. But I think next week absolutely is a neutral site game, if not a game that looks like a Vikings home game.
Oh, it's a Vikings home game. Yeah, I mean, the Vikings have a huge fan base over in just Europe in general. And when they've played in London, they have had at least 60-40, 70-30 for the fan bases. And also, I just from a little statistical work, Pittsburgh's sack rate home versus away, very different. So I wonder how that will go in Dublin with whatever turf that they may be playing on. Andrew Filipponi, unfortunately, we did not cross paths in Buffalo. We did work at the same radio station, and I kind of took your spot. So it's a cool little connection there. And I love to see the success that you have had in Pittsburgh and on the national level as well. So I'm glad we could get together and do this. I could ask you the questions this time, and I am sure we'll talk again very soon, my friend.
Matthew, thanks for having me on, brother. Anytime you need me. Appreciate it.
That is Andrew Filipponi, host of he's got his own show there in Pittsburgh on 93.7 The Fan. And as you could tell, he is a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers, doesn't seem to be a fan of the idea of them winning this football game. So let's get Manny Hill here in just a second. And I'm very curious to find out if Manny thinks that the Vikings are going to win this one and the rest of them, because we will pick the schedule, but we'll have some conversation as well. Manny, good evening, my friend. Sam Darnold's playing football tonight. Aaron Rodgers is playing. Who else could have been the quarterback of the Vikings from last year that is having a season we're going to be paying attention to? Earlier in the show, Manny, I was talking about how with Aaron Rodgers, my own perspective is sort of weighing the annoyance of Rodgers and just who he is and the darkness retreats and going to, I don't know, see the pyramids or something rather than OTAs, and just how obnoxious he has been over a big portion of his career with some of the magnificent things that I've seen him do in person. And I have to say, I'm just impressed. And at one time he was, one of the best quarterbacks in the history of the game. And as you play him here, maybe for the last time ever, I was reflecting a bit on the different games that I saw him play, especially in the Zimmer era. And, then last year, it just didn't look like the same. It was kind of miserable to watch him play last year. And so you kind of want some sort of balance in between, like, everyone who's watching this would prefer that the Vikings win the game against Aaron Rodgers, but maybe a throw or two where you're like, he's still got just enough for this not to be sad. So how do you feel about Aaron Rodgers. Like give me a word to describe how you feel about Aaron Rodgers. Or several words. It's a long show.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I don't know if there's one specific word, but I think in terms of just the football stuff, if we take out all of the sort of the shenanigans over the last, a handful of years with all the weird the ayahuasca and the darkness retreats and all that stuff, um, I don't think even as a fan of, the rival team that he played for so many years, I don't think you can look at what he did on the football field and not at least have a strong level of respect for what he was able to accomplish, particularly at the height of his career with the Green Bay Packers. It was always frustrating going up against him, and we saw many times where he would, come into the Metrodome back in the days of the Dome and play really well and sort of dagger the Vikings and break their hearts. And then, he came into US Bank Stadium a few times and did kind of the same thing. But it's I think when you factor in all of the years that he had in Green Bay and then all of the years with Brett Favre with the Green Bay Packers before that, I think you have to really, as a Vikings fan, you have to kind of appreciate just the battles, all the, all of the matchups, all the high stakes games. I think about week 17 in 2012, the year Adrian Peterson won the MVP, that great game. And that was an important game for both teams. The Vikings were trying to clinch a playoff spot, get that 10th win and make it in. The Packers were playing everybody in that game because they were trying to get a first round bye. If they win that game, they already had the North locked up, but they were trying to win that game and get a first round bye. The Vikings won that game. Of course, they had to play the Packers again the next week, but that changed what the Packers were able to do in the postseason because they had to go to San Francisco, and that's when Colin Kaepernick ran all over them in the divisional round. And so think about games like that and just all of the big moments in the battles. And it's just, I just have kind of a even though I'm not a huge fan of him as a person with all the off the field stuff, I have a tremendous amount of respect for everything he's done on the football field during his career.
There's just so many moments between him and the Vikings. And when he eventually does retire, maybe it's after this year. And the fact that he's been on the schedule is kind of funny too. It's like he's left, but he's not out of your life yet because you still have to have the Aaron Rodgers conversation. And he's just always been there. I mean, the guy has played for so many years in the NFL. There are many Vikings fans who are adults who have never watched a season of the Minnesota Vikings where Aaron Rodgers was not playing them in some capacity outside of the one he tore his Achilles. And every other season, Aaron Rodgers is there. And it's nice to have a foil. It's nice to have somebody, it's sports, right? Somebody to despise, somebody to look forward to. Tell me every single year, Vikings fans, when they got the schedule, they were not circling first. When do they play at Lambeau? When does Aaron Rodgers come here? The stadium is more amped up than ever. And actually, thinking about the different Rodgers versus Vikings moments, which I want you to throw a few at me because I threw a few out at the beginning of the show. He said in 2021, and this is when it's actually, there were a couple moments when you knew it was really over for Zimmer, but they won the game in 2021. And it was actually a phenomenal Justin Jefferson. Kirk Cousins led a game-winning drive in that game. Remember, Rodgers had the 2 touchdowns in like 15 seconds back-to-back in the huge bomb, I think, to Valdez-Scantling. And after the game, they asked Rodgers just about the atmosphere, and he was like, it wasn't really the same as when I've been here before. And I thought it's over for Zimmer. When you can't even have the fans buying into a game like this, which was one of the most fun games, I think, of the entire era, the way that one went back and forth, it was so entertaining. And yet it was still like, even he was commenting on how it wasn't the same because the juice was just gone and the fans didn't have it anymore for Mike Zimmer, even when the game was really, really fun. So there's a lot of those like historic points that he's a part of. And naturally the return of Favre, and him playing Green Bay, and Rodgers comes in and doesn't play all that well against Favre in the Metrodome. He's just always like every single big thing that happens to the Vikings, he's there somehow, somewhere. You mentioned 2012, but the 2017 one where he gets injured. And that's the moment I actually said to Ben Gessling, I remember in the locker room after, I said, Ben, we're covering playoff games this year. After Aaron Rodgers went down and it was clear that he was very hurt, like we knew there's no one else in this division that's going to have a chance to chase down this team right now. So here we go. Like this is going to be one of those crazy seasons. So I want you to think of maybe your 2 or 3 favorite Rodgers Vikings moments, but give me a second first, because we do have some sponsors on the show, which we love. And one of them is ZipRecruiter. If you are somebody who is in a position to hire, you know what? It's not easy. I hire a few interns a year, and it's not the easiest thing in the world. I can imagine if you're somebody who has to hire all the time, you get tons of resumes you have to sort through, people who are unqualified, people who don't actually even want the job. How do you even know how to get to the best candidates? Sometimes they become a needle in the haystack to find. Well, with ZipRecruiter, that is not the case. It's so easy to use ZipRecruiter. And in fact, you could try it out for free at ZipRecruiter.com/audio, and you could see how easy some of their smart technology is to use, where they can help you find great candidates quickly with the invite to apply button. Also, if you want someone to, that's if you want someone to apply, but their technology will actually find you candidates. So whether you know who you want or you don't know who you want, ZipRecruiter will help you out there. So ditch all the other hiring sites. Let ZipRecruiter find what you're looking for, that needle in a haystack, great candidate for your job. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. So try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/audio. That is ZipRecruiter.com/audio, the smartest way to hire. Okay, Manny, I know you need about 0.5 seconds to think about your most interesting Rodgers versus Vikings moments, but I give you about a minute there. So what do you got?
Well, I brought up 2012 already. That's kind of the one that stands out to me the most, because that felt like that week 17 game at the Metrodome felt like a playoff. I mean, essentially was a playoff game certainly for the Vikings, because they needed to win it to get in. I think about 2008 as well. First game of the season. It was a Monday night game. And that was Rodgers' first start as the starting quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, because at that point, Favre had moved on to the Jets. And I remember Tavares Jackson's very crucial interception at the end of that game that frustrated me quite a bit, that gave the Packers the victory. And what is interesting is, Rodgers' first season as a starter with the Packers, they went 6-10. They were not a good football team. He had a pretty good season statistically, but that team was not very good. And I remember thinking, especially with Favre having moved on, I was thinking, is this going to be a guy that just puts up good numbers, but they don't really win a whole lot? And eventually the fans are going to get frustrated with him because he's not Favre and all that stuff. And then was it 2 years later, he ends up winning the Super Bowl and winning Super Bowl MVP. And even in that season in 2010, I think about it was the last game before Brad Childress was fired at the Metrodome, and the Packers came in and blew the doors out of the Vikings and just really dominated. And, that Packers team went on to win the Super Bowl that year with a great defense, and Rodgers going off in the playoffs against Atlanta and finding a way to win at Soldier Field in the NFC title game. But yeah, that 2008 and 2010, unfortunately, they're both Vikings losses, but those are ones that kind of stand out to me as well.
Well, those do come up with the losses quite a bit into my head, because we know this about the Wilfs, that the Wilf ownership cares a lot about Green Bay, and Green Bay tends to spark action. And when in 2019, remember, Rodgers actually played badly in the game. He threw 2 picks to Anthony Harris, but the other quarterback played much worse at the end of the season. That was one of the most hyped games I can ever remember, because if they beat the Packers, they would have had a chance to still win the division the following week. And if they had gotten the division, then you get a home playoff game, and you know how badly the Wilfs wanted that home playoff game. Instead, they lose. Zadarius Smith has one of the freakiest games that I've ever seen from a defensive end / outside linebacker, and the Vikings sort of fall apart. And then after that was when the rumors of trading Mike Zimmer to the Dallas Cowboys came out. And it was going into a playoff game. And then I was just saying this the other day because the term vibes ended up being a thing last week. And I was kind of laughing about it because the vibes were the worst of all time around the team in 2019. And then they go to New Orleans and they win that game, which saved Mike Zimmer's job. And Kevin Stefanski probably would have been the head coach after that. They probably would have drafted a quarterback, which that 2020 class had all good quarterbacks, and like, who knows what ends up happening after that. Well, I guess no, that's right. The 2020 class. So they instead extend Kirk because he won in the playoffs, and Rick Spielman at the combine says Kirk proved to us that he can really win in the playoffs. Like, how many dominoes? And that all kind of goes back to that game against the Packers, because otherwise they might not have been playing against the Saints. And that was the one that even put him on the hot seat. So when things went wrong the next year, it was like he was already there, and it was a short extension and, et cetera. So it always feels like Rodgers is just there in a big moment, which brings us to this week, Manny, against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think that this is a really big moment in this season, that when we review, and one of the things you and I love to do, we love to go back through history. We love to talk about the games and what they meant and when the seasons turned and feelings turned on certain players and things like that. And I can think of multiple moments of every season which took it either somewhere great or took it somewhere terrible. And this feels to me like it has the potential to take it somewhere great or somewhere terrible. Are you having a similar feeling? Because I think if they win, you've got Cleveland coming up, who has a great defense, but you should beat Cleveland. I mean, then you're looking at 4-1 going back home, and you've got a lot of home games after that, and you're in pretty good shape, even though it's a tough schedule. But if you lose to Pittsburgh, you're going to feel like it's season on the brink already.
Yeah, I mean, it's the ultimate fork in the road. I mean, and we talk about vibes a lot and what the vibe is around this football team, depending on, where we're at in the season, how they've looked at a certain point of the season. You find a way to win these next two games in Europe, you starting with this Sunday morning against Pittsburgh. I think you've got to be feeling really good about where you're headed and the potential to be a playoff team and maybe make some noise depending on what seed you get in the playoffs. But if you split these next two games, and if you don't win this game against Pittsburgh and then, beat Cleveland the next week because they're just not that good of a team, then you're sitting at 3-2 and you're not feeling bad, but are you really feeling great? Because it's kind of like, okay, yeah, well, we beat Cleveland. We're supposed to do that. We're supposed to beat the Cleveland Browns. But man, we should have had that game against the Steelers the week before. And so I think that this is an opportunity. This is a Pittsburgh team that I'm not sure they're really all that good. I mean, they beat a bad Jets team and had to rely on some huge defensive plays late in that game against a Jets team that's just, I don't think they're very good at all. Their defense is not very good. And then they just looked horrible at home against Seattle the next week. And then they barely hung on to beat, a New England team that might not be very good this year either. So I'm not really sure how good Pittsburgh is. And this feels like an opportunity for the Vikings to go in and do what they're supposed to do, because even though the overall quarterback play these first three games as a whole hasn't been all that great, this is still a football team with a lot of talent that has a chance to make some noise. And this is a game that I think, with the weaknesses that we're kind of seeing with this Pittsburgh team, this is a game that you should be able to take care of and win.
Well, and the Vikings are, I looked at this today, 26th in passing EPA through the first 3 weeks. They have been 7th and 10th when they had their starting quarterbacks for the full season, when it was Kirk in 2022 and when it was Sam Darnold last year. that's where we expect them to be based on this offense, the weapons they're bringing back. Jordan Addison here, Christian Darrisaw is back healthy, and you're missing Donovan Jackson, but replacing him with a fairly good guard to begin with. Like, you've got everything overseas, and we never know what's going to happen in this next game, but you got everything to face the Pittsburgh Steelers with, and the veteran quarterback that they spent all week praising about how well he played within the system, and talking about how quick the ball came out, the anticipation, and all those things that O'Connell was talking about this week, liking about having Carson Wentz at quarterback. If you go out and you don't look the same and you struggle offensively, I mean, a whole almost quarter of the season where you can't pass the football, and we're going to be going, I don't care who's playing quarterback. If you can't move the ball like this, then all of a sudden it does throw back to 2012 or something, except for you don't have a 2,000-yard runner. You got a great runner, but you don't have a 2,000-yard runner to bail you out in this type of season. And then you could be talking actually kind of 2016-ish, where the offense just can't really do much and the defense is really good, and eventually the defense cracks. Like, you could see that going in that direction, because then it's going to feel like you don't have an answer at all at quarterback, where if Wentz plays really well, then you can handle JJ exactly how Kevin O'Connell wants to handle JJ, as opposed to, well, that didn't work, so get back in there, kid, and see what happens. I think the benefit of Carson Wentz playing well over the next couple games is that it allows Kevin O'Connell to see him in practice. If you remember, the head coach watches the quarterbacks in practice. Mike Zimmer let us know. I see him every day with Kellen Mond. It allows him to see JJ's progress. It allows him to work with McCarthy on better understanding the offense and what he needs to do, and what Wentz as a veteran is doing that's working. All that stuff can be good for JJ McCarthy in the long term of a guy who's going to have a long career in the NFL, I think. But if Wentz struggles and you feel like you're forced to throw McCarthy back in, and then when you're forced to throw him back in is either against Cleveland's defense or Philly or the Chargers or even the Lions, who just gave Lamar Jackson a hell of a hard time, that doesn't feel as comfortable to me if this happens. So there is a major swing here, not only on the season and how it could play out and how badly you need these wins with the schedule that's upcoming, but also just the quarterback situation and the flexibility you have. Because if Wentz plays terribly, and then I don't know if anyone's going to play great against Cleveland's defense all year, they're so good, then you could be looking at, all right, well, that didn't work. Now you got to go back to the other thing. It's got to feel maybe to you like 2008 again. I can't think of another situation. I have not covered one like this, Manny, since I've been here. It's always been like, hey, the only time it was a controversy, I think, was when Teddy came back and Keenum had a very bad game against Carolina, and they lost in 2017. And there was a meeting about, hey, should we go to Teddy? Like, maybe, Keenum, just the magic wore off or something. And they decided, it's a lot to ask of Teddy, and Keenum's mostly been winning. So they stayed with him. But I don't remember another time where there was any sort of, it was like Kirk's the quarterback. There was never, oh, it's actually going to be Sean Mannion or, or Kellen Mond or whoever else it was going to be. It was always going to be him. And last year, even if there would have been a controversy, we never got there, and we never would have, because Sam Darnold played so well. So this is the first time in a very long time that there is a dicey situation with Kevin O'Connell managing a quarterback situation.
Yeah, and this goes back to what I said the other day, is if Carson Wentz doesn't play well, if he doesn't play well Sunday and then he struggles against Cleveland, even if you've won both of those games, but you want to make a change and go back to JJ McCarthy, just because sort of the volatility at that point that you're getting from Wentz, you just don't know what you're getting out of him. And you put McCarthy back in, and a lot of the struggles that we saw in the first 2 weeks of the season continue. Then what do? You're kind of in a spot where you almost have to ride it out with McCarthy at that point, no matter how bad it gets, because you put him back out there and then you get into a situation where you have to now bench him. What is that going to do for his long-term future? And so it's a very delicate situation. I trust Kevin O'Connell to be able to handle it and make the right decision at the right time. And, if and when McCarthy does come back and play this season, it's going to be, I trust KOC that it's going to be the right time for him to come back in and be ready to go. But if he's not, it's going to be a really, really dicey situation, because then how do you even go to Carson Wentz if you decide to pull McCarthy again? How do you go back to Carson Wentz and say, like, hey man, like, about that,
You still good?
you still want to go out there and play? What do you think? How is that gonna? And I would imagine in that circumstance, Carson would be a professional and go out there and play, but how's he going to be feeling? You know what I mean? And then what kind of impact is that going to have on the rest of the locker room as well?
Let me get your opinion on the FanDuel question of the day, and then I want to answer a question here from the chat, and I want to have a very brief conversation about Sam Darnold, and then let's pick the schedule. The FanDuel question of the day, Manny, is Dallas Turner is the favorite on FanDuel to get a sack against Aaron Rodgers. I think I probably would have had to be Jonathan Grenard, but I could see it at plus 106. How many times do you think the Vikings have to sack Aaron Rodgers to win this football game?
I tend to think, Pittsburgh's offensive line has had their struggles. And Rodgers is not really moving around the way he used to.
Only slightly, Manny. Only slightly.
Yeah. I think if you can get to him 3 or 4 times, sack him 3 or 4 times, I think that's a pretty good morning, I guess I'll say, on Sunday.
I came down with 3. I think if you sack him 3 times, especially one early, then that will speed him up. He clearly doesn't want to get hit these days, and he'll start because against the blitz, the number that I saw on PFF was he's only 11 for 23 passing against the blitz. A couple are red zone touchdowns for him, but that to me says he's, I'm being blitzed. Let me just get this ball out of my hands and not bother with the hits that are going to come after that. If that's how he's going to play, then that Brian Flores is going to take advantage of that. So I think 3 is a really good answer. So Sam Darnold, Damad asked about opinion on Jordan Addison's return and how big of a piece he'll be, and says, think Hockenson is more key than Addison. I think where Addison is important is that he's so prolific downfield at tracking the football that he can run routes that are 17 yards, snap off at the exact right yardage, his break, and have the ball be there on time. And Jalen Naylor, I don't think quite runs routes at that level. Like Adam Thielen doesn't run routes at that level anymore. This is another guy who's just going to be open for Carson Wentz to throw to, that you just haven't felt that, hey, they can't stop what's going on out here. Even last week, it was checkdowns and dinks to TJ Hockenson, and then it was a couple of really nice throws to Justin Jefferson, and then it was like, okay, hit the showers, and Max Brosmer will take it from here. I think that there'll be a little more of a challenge, and he, to me, is the swing man for this entire thing of being unstoppable. Like the idea of they can't cover everybody, it really, I think, hinges mostly on Jordan Addison. But who has more catches, I would probably say TJ Hockenson, because Wentz clearly likes to lean on that little quick, it's not there, let me just go right to him. Addison is what makes this thing what it is.
Yeah, 100%. It's kind of like you insert him in, and it kind of puts everybody else, in the pecking order of this offense. We know Justin Jefferson is at the top and number 1 and everything, but you insert Addison into that sort of that number 2 wide receiver spot. It kind of moves everybody else. It moves Naylor down a spot. It moves Adam Thielen down a spot, and it kind of actually opens things up potentially for some of those other guys to have success, because the league knows that Jordan Addison is a weapon, that he's a legit threat, like you said, down the field, runs really good intermediate routes. And I think having him out there is just another guy that a defense is going to have to account for, and it's going to open things up for guys like TJ Hockenson to have more opportunities when they're available. So I think it's going to be huge having him back. I think it's only going to help this offense click and flow even better. So I think it's going to be huge getting him back.
So as we are chatting right now, it's 7-3 Seahawks. I don't know what's going to happen. Last week we were talking and it was like a close game, and then it went or something. Maybe that was post-game. Post-game, I was doing the post-game, and it was like 14-14 Bears and Cowboys. And I was like, I don't know. Yeah, the Cowboys will probably win the game. And then they didn't. So, who knows where it'll go from here tonight. But I have thought about Sam Darnold over these first couple of weeks because he's played extremely well with the Seattle Seahawks. He's been a good fit there with Jackson Smith-Njigba in particular. And it does come to mind the offseason decision that they made, considering that Carson Wentz is now the quarterback of the Vikings. And we all know about how much it would have cost, the contract, the fact that he's probably not signing a contract for cheap, that he would have to be franchise tagged. We all know that, like all those caveats. But I do wonder where they would be if Sam Darnold was their quarterback. We saw the struggle Darnold had against really great defensive lines, but he also managed his way through Cam Robinson for like 8 weeks last year. And the one thing that I'll always kind of wonder about Manny with Sam Darnold is what he would have looked like in a year 2 of a Kevin O'Connell offense. It's one of those things where it's like, let's say that you date somebody in college, and then right after college, you get a job in New York, she gets a job in LA, and you're like, well, look, we both loved this. This was a lot of fun, and we care about each other, but you're going to New York, I'm going to LA, and we've just got to part ways. But then 20 years later, you're sitting in the rocking chair, having the morning coffee, and you're wondering, wonder what that would have been like had we stayed together. And I have a little bit of that watching Sam Darnold because he was just learning that offense last year, and Kirk took another step in the second year with KOC. Like, what would that have been like had they have been able to make that work with Sam Darnold? I know that's not something that people really want to think about right now, but I can't help it when I'm watching him play as good as he is in Seattle. And I also think that it wasn't just a random fluke. I think he's a good quarterback. I don't think he's the best quarterback ever, but I think he's good.
Yeah, and when you think about where he is at in his career, we've seen a lot of quarterbacks over the years play their best football when they're at about the age that Sam Darnold is at. When he's in his late 20s, he's been in the league for, 7 or 8 years, got a lot of football under his belts, made a lot of starts. And this is kind of when we see the peak out of a lot of these quarterbacks. Now, some of these guys, they go into their 30s and they get into their mid 30s and they still have some success. But this is kind of the sweet spot for a lot of quarterbacks that we've seen. Even, for as great as Tom Brady was in his late 30s and into his 40s, he's still winning Super Bowls and MVPs and all that stuff. When Tom Brady was 28, 29 years old, he was pretty damn good then too. You know what I mean? And certainly I'm not saying Sam Darnold is Tom Brady, but you know what I mean? Like a lot of these guys, they play their best football when they are 28, 29, maybe getting ready to turn 30 years old. And this is where Sam is at. And so you kind of wonder, like, again, another year, another training camp in KOC's system. He was a great fit for it last year. I think what happened late in the season was, I think the offensive line just wasn't great. I mean, it just you lose Darisaw for the season, and Cam Robinson did the best that he could, but he wasn't Christian Darisaw, and so that had a huge impact, I think, on how well Sam was able to perform. And I think what's interesting is, and I don't know if they still would have been able to pull it off, but like you've got Jordan Mason now in this backfield. What does having Jordan Mason do for somebody like Sam Darnold? And this is no knock on Aaron Jones, but we saw the running game kind of struggle late in the season last year. And I think it was just Aaron Jones kind of wearing down in the latter part of the season. But what does having a more proficient running game do for a guy like Sam Darnold as well?
Well, that's exactly the way I was thinking of this too, is I know you can't do it. I know it wouldn't have worked with the salary cap and the money that they spent. You don't spend the most money in the entire NFL in cash if you're also franchise tagging a quarterback. That's the reason so few teams franchise tag their quarterback, because that's just one big lump of cap hit right there, and there's not a lot of great ways to work around it. But if you could just sort of superimpose what they were able to get with what they had last year, who knows? Maybe he would have come apart in the playoffs anyway, but he probably would have looked a lot more comfortable with Will Fries, Donovan Jackson, Ryan Kelly, especially,
Mm-hmm.
and Christian Darrisaw than he looked with Cam Robinson, Blake Brandel, Garrett Bradbury, and Dalton Reisner, who we saw just get completely worked against the Vikings last week. Such is life, right? If Kirk Cousins is the quarterback in 2017, maybe they go to the Super Bowl instead of Case Keenum. I don't know, right? That's how it goes. Sometimes it just doesn't quite cross paths the right way. And I've been thinking about that. But Sam Darnold, just before we get to picking the schedule, when Vikings fans see him, and I understand you're not going to root again for him when the Vikings play Seattle, but when you see him on national TV and he's playing well, my impression of Sam Darnold could not have been higher. My respect for him could not have been higher with the way that he handled it last year and the fun that he gave Vikings fans throughout that season, the class in which he handled the situation, 1-year deal, 10 million bucks. You got to, work with a young quarterback here. You're not the guy coming in that anybody wants to see be the quarterback. And he played great. And provided a very, very fun season for them. So I think Vikings fans should always have a special place for him, similar to how they do with some of the other great journeymen who have been here. Okay, let's do our thing, Manny. Let's pick the schedule. I'm very interested to see what you do with this, all things considered. So why don't we start with this week? Vikings and Pittsburgh Steelers. They sit at 2-1. Will they be 3-1 coming out of this game?
I think they will be. I don't like this matchup for Pittsburgh. I just don't think their defense is very good. And it's weird because they've got some dudes on defense.
Yeah.
And it's really strange to see them not, and a lot of those guys are getting older. Slay is older, Jalen Ramsey is older, even TJ Watt is, a little bit longer in the tooth than what he used to be. But it's still just weird seeing a Pittsburgh Steelers defense not be good. And I think the Vikings and Carson Wentz are going to be able to take advantage of that and come away with a win.
Yep, I agree. I've got it 27-17. Does that sound good to you? Somewhere in that range? Yep. All right, so then the Vikings scoot over. I don't have my map here, my world map, so I don't know if that's what direction. I didn't do very good in geography, but they will be traveling not too far over to London to play against the Cleveland Browns and Joe Flacco. Quick aside, Shedeur Sanders today saying that he's better than a lot of NFL quarterbacks. Whose choice was it to let Shedeur Sanders do an interview when he's QB3? You ever seen a quarterback be QB3 outside of training camp and do an interview? I mean, in the middle of the season, I have never seen that. He's just proven everybody right about the guy being clueless about how to handle that position. Anyway, he ain't starting because he ain't good. So it's going to be Joe Flacco, I assume, maybe Dylan Gabriel, depending on how things go. Do the Vikings beat the vaunted Browns defense?
I think they win this game to go to 4-1. I do think it's going to be kind of sloppy. I mean, the Browns just kind of play these snot-nosed, just low-scoring, grinded-out games. I think the Vikings win this game, but I'm getting like 16 to 10 vibes where you never really feel like the Vikings are going to lose, but they never really bust this game open because the Browns defense is so good.
Yeah, I could see that. Darrisaw versus Myles Garrett. I saw it in joint practices, and what a freaking battle that was. Now it will be in real life. So the 4-1 Vikings, they get a long break. How about this? October 5th to October 19th. They will have all that time to get back, reacclimated to the time zone, get healthy, and presumably will have a quarterback as their backup wearing number 9, who in this scenario where they're 4-1 also has a healthy ankle. Vikings and Eagles at US Bank Stadium, October 19th. How does this one go?
I think the Philadelphia Eagles have earned the right to be considered the best team in the NFC just because of what they did obviously last year and so many great players that they have. I'm going to give the Vikings a win here.
Whoa.
I think coming out of a bye with kind of the 2 weeks off, getting their bodies back and acclimated to being back in the US, The game's at home. I think they're going to come out and play really well, and it's going to be a tight game because the Eagles are that good. But I think the Vikings will play well enough and win the football game and go to 5-1.
There are some signals. I don't want to totally doubt the Eagles, but there are some early signals of maybe it's not as good as it was last year. Their coverage has been problematic, and their running back is not averaging 6 yards a carry as you would have expected after a 2,000-yard season. We've seen that in Minnesota as well, that it is hard to go back to back with that type of performance. So a 5-1 Minnesota Vikings team at that point would be talked about as a potential Super Bowl favorite there. Now they go out to play James Harbaugh and the Los Angeles Chargers. 4 days rest. I don't know how many Vikings fans can make the flight. People have jobs, people have lives. Flying out there on a Thursday night, it was noticeably more pro Rams. And considering that Herbert's playing like an MVP candidate, if he still is at that point, I do expect that the LA crowd will be there for this. It won't be a pseudo home game for the Vikings, 50-50 maybe at best. So do they handle Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers?
I'm going to say no. I think that the Chargers will win this game. It's going to be a short week for the Vikings where they have to travel. The Chargers will be coming off a home game against Indianapolis that Sunday. So they won't have to do any travel. They can just sleep in their nice, warm, cozy beds that entire week. And it's a Chargers defense that I think is really, really good. A secondary that I think is really good. And so I think the Chargers come away with the win, dropping the Vikings to 5-2.
So if the Vikings are 5-2 and Carson Wentz doesn't play well, assuming that he's the one that beats the Eagles in this scenario that you're picking, I guess it starts to depend on how it's looked overall when you get these wins, because the only season I have to lean on recently that's quarterback controversy is 2008. And what eventually happened in 2008 was, even though Gus had won games, it had been pretty gnarly, and they eventually went back to Tavares. So I think we could see that even a scenario where they're 5-2. Kind of depends. Another long break from October 23rd. This is what a weird schedule. You play October 5th, then the 19th and 23rd, and then not again till November 2nd, but that is at Ford Field at 5-2 against the Detroit Lions.
Tough matchup, tough place to play. The Lions are still really good at Ford Field, as we saw week 2 against the hapless Chicago Bears. And the Lions are going to be coming off a bye week. Their bye week is week 8. So they're going to be coming off some rest as well. So I think they're going to be feeling pretty good, feeling fresh, ready to kind of start the second half of the season. So I'll give Detroit the win at Ford Field here.
Okay, so the Vikings then drop to 5-3, and maybe the conversation is increasing about J.J. McCarthy returning, but they will play the Ravens. Though, in years past, Manny, we would have said, those Ravens, their defense is nasty, and we haven't seen that from the Baltimore Ravens. Last year, they were able to turn it around. I don't know if they're going to be able to turn it around. It might depend very much on their health. I'm really not sure. At some point, it was bound to happen where the Ravens would just have a bad defense based on, personnel or injuries or whatever, because they've been so consistently good. They look like they can't stop the run at all. They didn't stop it against Buffalo. They didn't stop it against Detroit. This is just not the same thing we usually expect from Baltimore's defense. So maybe this could be a spot where you do think about bringing back McCarthy after back-to-back losses. Let's assume that it's Wentz here. Do the Vikings win?
I'm going to give the Vikings the win here because Baltimore kind of looks like, right now they kind of look like a 10-7, 11-6, 10-7 type of team. That's still, I think, going to be good enough to win that division because there's just nobody else. The Browns aren't going to challenge for it. I don't think Pittsburgh's very good. Joe Burrow is still going to be out for a while, so it's going to be the Jake Browning show for Cincinnati. That didn't look very good on Sunday. So I think the Ravens are going to be that team that can kind of afford to lose games like this and still be in pretty good position to win their division and get a home playoff game and all that. So I think the Vikings will kind of realize that they need this game more coming off the loss to Detroit that I'm predicting, and they'll come home against Baltimore and play well and win.
Okay, that gets us to 6-3. Is that right?
6-3.
Yep. Okay, that's a pretty good outcome as the Bears come to US Bank Stadium. The last time Caleb Williams was there, Not too happy did he leave US Bank Stadium. That is on November 16th. So the 6-3 Vikings versus either the Bears that have completely collapsed or the Bears that have emerged. At this point, it could still go either way, I guess.
I'm gonna say the Vikings win this game. The Bears had a nice get right game against the terrible Dallas Cowboys defense. And even still, like 31 points is a lot, but you only score 31 points against the Dallas Cowboys defense. It's kind of like, all right, cool,
Right.
good, nice day at the office.
Everyone does.
Yeah, everybody does. So yeah, I think this game being at US Bank Stadium, I think the Bears will come in and play okay, but I think the Vikings will get the win.
Okay, that makes sense. And you could see, the typical Caleb Williams stuff, some miracles and some really ugly plays and turnovers, etc. So now they go November 23rd to Lambeau. I'm just looking forward to it. I mean, when you get that late fall, not quite winter yet, where it's going to maybe affect the game, but it's not going to be an ice bowl or something. The leaves are coming down on your way to Wisconsin. I know a lot of you make that drive. I mean, I love this game for the Vikings being on November 23rd at Lambeau Field, but as a 7-3 team that is probably being talked about as, maybe a darling in the NFC at this moment, do they beat Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers?
I'm going to say no, because I feel like the Packers defense, will be the time of the year where that Packers defense, which is already really good, is really going to be hitting their stride. They're going to have Micah Parsons fully ingrained into that unit, and they're going to be clicking on all cylinders then. And so I'm going to say Green Bay wins this game at Lambeau and plays really well.
Whoever goes down there, whether it's Wentz or McCarthy, it's not easy. It's never easy. And I think that actually Kirk eventually kind of got used to it because he did it so many times. And then you thought, well, he'll probably play well every time. Darnold had a good half and then a really bad half at Lambeau. But I think it still has its mystique. It still has its intimidation factor. And we've seen it with this defense. This defense, I don't think, is going anywhere for Green Bay. They're going to be very good. They had, even against Cleveland, I mean, they should have won the game. Their defense played exceptionally. That's going to be a tough one for the Vikings. So they're 7-4 going out to Seattle for the non-revenge game, the thank you game. Thank you for all the money that Sam Darnold earned. He should appreciate KOC for that. But is it thank you, Sam, for a win or not at Seattle?
I think this is going to be a tough game for the Vikings because I think Seattle's going to be in a position where, Seattle can win that division.
Yep.
That division,
Yep.
San Francisco is 3-0, but they've really been getting away by the skin of their teeth in all three of these games. Granted, one of them was against week one against Seattle. But, I think the Seahawks are going to be playing pretty well at this point of the year. That's still a tough place to play. Sam did go out there and get a win out there in a Vikings uniform last year, but it's a tough place to play. That crowd still, the 12s out there still like to be rocking. So I'll give Seattle the win here.
Where I think Seattle's probably some surprise to people is that they're protecting pretty well for Sam Darnold. Yeah. If they keep doing that, and Gray Zabel's been really good, if they keep doing that, they can be a very dangerous team. So now we're talking about a real roller coaster, 7-5. They'll play the Commanders at home on December 7th. We can't even begin to guess what's happening at quarterback at this point, because if you've had back-to-back losses, if it went really badly for Carson Wentz, maybe you're feeling like you got to make a change down the stretch run. Maybe you're feeling at that point like you can't. There's so many options with McCarthy. If you told me he played next week, I'd be like, okay. If you told me he didn't play again, I'd be like, okay. Like I could believe either one of those. But Vikings home against the Commanders December 7th. Do they win?
I'm going to say yes. Washington, I think, is really good when they're healthy. Right now, Jaden Daniels is not healthy. Marcus Mariota had to start for them. Played pretty well against the Raiders. Is he going to be healthy by then? It's 2 months away. So, we'll 2.5 months away. So we'll see. But I'll give the Vikings the edge here just because it's at home, and I think they're going to be a better home team than road team this year.
So an 8-5 Vikings team then goes to play the Cowboys, who you might arrive and the stadium is burnt down at that point. The way that things have gone for Dallas, almost winning against the Eagles and then how they fell apart against the Bears. And now CeeDee Lamb is banged up. It just feels like this is the year where it all truly comes apart. Last year, they did enough to fight for air at the end. And you're like, okay, well, they've still got some pieces. They're just toast, I think, at this point.
This Cowboys defense is so bad. I cannot believe it.
This is the game to bring back McCarthy, by the way.
Yeah, maybe. I thought, you trade away one of the great defensive players on earth, your defense is going to take a hit. But I didn't think that they would be this bad. And maybe I should have expected them to be this bad because they were kind of bad last year with Micah Parsons. But maybe I just thought that was more so, Mike Zimmer the league kind of catching up to Mike Zimmer's defense and all of that. But they can't blame this on Mike Zimmer no more. That unit is awful. And I think whoever's playing a quarterback for the Vikings is going to go in and have a field day, and the Vikings win running away.
9-5 going to New York. Remember when at the end of the offseason, there was sort of a run of people saying that they thought the Giants were going to be good. And it was like, all right, start the season, everybody. Like, this is... maybe even I said it at one point, like maybe they'll be like, we're just every team at that point we've talked about so much. They're not good. Brian Daboll, I don't know how much of it is his fault, but it hasn't been good for him since he beat Ed Donatell's defense. What is his record, by the way, since they beat the Vikings in the playoffs? It's got to be like a 20% win percentage or something since they won that game against Eddie Ballgame. But the December 21st, it's a beautiful time in New York. The Christmas tree is going to be up. Should be a fun trip, I think, for the Vikings. I mean, this one, come on, this has got to be right.
Yeah. The Vikings are not going to lose this game. If they lose this game, whether it's Russell Wilson or Jameis Winston or Jackson Dart playing at quarterback, the Vikings should go in and take care of business at MetLife and win this game pretty running away. And by the way, Brian Daboll, I believe my math is serving me well. He is, if you include the playoff game in Philadelphia the next week, he is 9-29.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Since beating Ed Donatel.
So there was a question last week about whether you have to pick a letdown game or not. I think the schedule is so hard that it's hard to find that. Like, you only have really three options. It's basically Cleveland, Dallas, or New York. And I guess it's fair, but I also think they should win those games. Like when we're picking the schedule. So let's hold off on that being a rule for now. And then if they have a letdown, or they show us signs of that, or they get killed by some good teams, maybe we'll re-implement letdown games as we go forward. But these ones, Cowboys and Giants, are just so bad right now. So you're talking about a 10-5 football team headed down the stretch to play the Lions and Packers. I like to kind of package these two games in your analysis because they are likely for the division, but I'm not sure with who. At the beginning of the year, one of my predictions, of which many have already gone wrong, was that Christmas Day game with the Lions will be for the division. That we'll do it again, only it'll be at US Bank Stadium. Now the Packers are pretty darn good as well, so it could be another Week 18. I mean, who knows? In this scenario, it feels like all three of these teams are going to be around that same ballpark when they arrive at this moment.
Yeah, and I think that this is an opportunity here for the Vikings. Having the Lions at home this late in the season, I think, is going to be very big. Christmas Day, yeah, everybody's going to be watching.
Well, if you have the 7-day trial, Netflix.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. This is a tough one for me to predict because all signs point to Detroit having played their best football at this stage of the season. But the Vikings are going to be at home, and I feel like at some point they're going to have to. At some point, Kevin O'Connell's got to find a way to beat the Detroit Lions.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna give the Vikings a win here.
Okay. So
And I
10,
have them at
11,
11-5.
11-5 going into the
Mm.
last week of the season. Jordan Love played amazingly against this team in 2023 and pretty terrible in 2024. Almost brought them back, but that was one of those fake box score type of games where he wasn't very good. What are we talking about here, Manny? Are you feeling like, despite the quarterback situation, that we are talking about a 12-win football team, or are you sticking with 11?
I'm gonna stick with 11 here.
Okay.
I think that this is a tough stretch. The last two games, after a very friendly stretch with going to Dallas and to New York,
Yeah.
this is a tough stretch to wrap up the season. Even though both games are at home, this is tough against two of the, I think, the best teams, certainly in the NFC, if not the NFL. Um, I have a hard time believing the Vikings will win both of these games.
Yeah.
So I gave them the win against Detroit. So I'm going to say Green Bay comes in and wins. And I think Green Bay solidifies and wins the division in week 18.
If you go into the playoffs at 11-6, in the NFC, the way that it is right now, you got just as much of a chance as anybody else. And you never know what can happen from there. And I think when we talk about what's a successful season, there's a bunch of different paths that you can get to call it a successful season. If things went terribly wrong with Carson Wentz in that stretch against all the good teams, and you go 0-4 and you just say, all right, let's go back to JJ McCarthy, and then he looks good, and you miss the playoffs by one game, like that could still be a success. It's not a good one. I'm not really into participation trophies in a year like this. I've said that all along. And that's why with Wentz, it's like, if he's the best guy to win, then win, because this is not a find out development, bridge. See, it's not that way for me. I've never viewed it that way because they don't. But you could still at least say, okay, well, that's pretty successful in the toughest division, and here comes McCarthy next year. Or if you're going to go Wentz the rest of the way, which the way you played it out, there's no place to really bench Carson Wentz. There's maybe one spot where they lose back-to-back games against the Chargers and Lions where you might think about it.
Mm-hmm.
If Wentz plays the rest of the way, you have to win 11 or more games for me.
I agree.
Okay, 10 if you get in, or maybe I'll set it. I'll just put it double digits. A 9-8 season with Carson Wentz is not good enough for me. I think you have to have double digits, because I just don't believe that a team is going to go into the playoffs at 9-8 and really compete for a Super Bowl. We've seen that a few times in history, not many, but you get to 11, you start going through the history like, okay, well, you find a lot of 11-win teams that got hot in the playoffs and went to the Super Bowl. You get to 12 and you're a very serious contender. I think they have to have that label on them when they arrive at the playoffs, if it's Carson Wentz the rest of the way, or you haven't succeeded.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that because to me, it kind of feels like if you've finished 9-8, or even dare I say 8-9, and Carson Wentz has played all these games, well, you can probably look back and say, could have brought back JJ McCarthy to have that kind of result. You know what I mean?
Right.
And JJ McCarthy is still the long-term plan for this organization going forward. And so if your end result, if you ride it out with Wentz the rest of the way, and your end result is basically a 500 team, you kind of wasted everybody's time, because you could have gotten McCarthy back out there to get that result, I would think, with this roster. And you will have, I think, missed on a real opportunity to kind of continue to develop JJ McCarthy. But if Wentz is playing well and you're winning enough games to get yourself into a pretty good playoff spot, then I think it makes a lot of sense. But if you're a 500 team, I think you've wasted everybody's time if that was done with Carson Wentz.
I think there's only one way this season could go, Manny. Carson Wentz gets banged up this week. Max Brosmer comes in, plays great, and never gives up the job ever again. And next year, it's Max's team, and someday they're putting a gold jacket on him. Look, I say that almost in jest, but it's happened before, which tells us how unpredictable the rest of the season is going to be. And last year, you fluctuated everywhere from maybe 9 wins to 15 wins at one point when picking the schedule. That's why we do it every week, to get a feeling of like, where are we at? Where are we setting expectations? How good can this team be? And it's going to be a ride that we don't know where it's going to end and what the stop-offs are going to be like along the way. So we will be doing this every Thursday night, picking the schedule and having a discussion. Also, it allows us to talk about where these other teams are at as well, because I probably would have said, hey, that Dallas game's not going to be easy. And then we've seen Dallas, okay, that game shouldn't be too hard. Manny Hill, you are the best, sir, every Thursday night. Folks, do not forget to answer that FanDuel question of the day if you're watching this on the replay. How many times do they need to sack Aaron Rodgers? Dallas Turner, the favorite to sack Rodgers at plus 106. How many times do they need to sack Rodgers to win the game? Okay, well, so tomorrow night, what's going to happen on the show? It'll be Andrew Kramer and also a brand new guest who's never been on before, but has one of the biggest football YouTube channels. Garrett Greenlee is going to join tomorrow. He is a lifelong Vikings fan who built a great YouTube channel. So that's going to be tomorrow night. We'll really get into the nitty gritty of Vikings versus Steelers. So make sure that you keep an eye out for that. Manny, I will see you again on Monday night, and we'll have even more answers to talk about with the Minnesota Vikings. Thank you for your time, sir.
Can't wait till Monday. Football is going to be a fun weekend.
And thank you all for watching and listening. Football.